Once again, please welcome Superbrothers.
Hello, people of Austin and elsewhere. It is a tremendous honor and a privilege to be in this city and at this particular event. It's kind of awesome. I'm really digging it. My first time at the event and in the city. Anyway, awesome. So I was invited by Mike and the organizers here in connection with this project that I've undertaken with some collaborators. That project, as you know, is Sword Sworcery, and it is a brave experiment in input-output cinema for Apple's Touchtronic machinery, set for release in the App Store in the not-too-distant future. Note of introduction, my name is Craig D. Adams, and I'm here as a representative of Superbrothers. Superbrothers is an ambiguously pluralized art and design organization located in Toronto, a city in the Dominion of Canada to the north and east of here. We're responsible for the high concepts, the art, the animation, a certain amount of the sound design, sound integration, and by we, I more or less mean me. And this is pretty much my first video game creation experience, at least like this, and it's an adventure for sure. The music in this project is by none other than Jim Guthrie, who is a rock star composer dude in Toronto. Jim was in an awesome band called Royal City, which is a wicked Canadian band from sort of 2001, 2003 kind of thing. I was a huge fan. And then he was in a Montreal pop band called Islands for a while. But he's also got a set of really great solo records, definitely worth checking out. I was a huge fan of his well before I started working with him, so it's an absolute treat. And this is also Jim's first video game creation experience, which makes things interesting. The code, the engineering, and a whole ton of the leadership and the guidance and the design problem solving is not by Jim or I. It's by an independent video game studio located in Toronto also. And those are the dudes at Cappy. They made a game called Critter Crunch for the iPhone, and they made it for PSN. It's a beautiful thing. As well as the awesomely amazing Might and Magic Clash of Heroes for DS. It doesn't sound like the most exciting thing you've ever played, but it's totally wicked. Definitely check it out, and they're actually making that for PSN and XBLA in the not too distant future as well. It's gonna kick ass. Cappy has made a mess of video games over the last 7 years, but most of them were in the pre-Apple mobile space, so nobody's ever heard of them. They're only just kind of showing up on people's radar now with these last two games that I mentioned. They basically made this whole project happen in the kindest, most amazing way you could possibly imagine. And I'll just be telling kind of the story behind the project, and I'll get to how that worked out. So, kind of on a surface level, what is SNSEP? Well, collaborative project, me, Jim, Cappy. It looks kind of like that. It's a video game type thing, and it's probably best described as like a 21st century treatment on like an old school adventure game of back in the day, with a bit of a more cinematic style, because obviously we can do that these days. And obviously, like the main inspiration is the music and the sound and the sort of the audiovisual experience. If you've seen the clips online, you pretty much know what I mean, but just to be safe, I'll roll a new clip so you can get a feel for it in case you haven't seen it or whatever. Here's something that we basically have just been working on, kind of hot off the proverbial press. I'll just roll it here, you'll get a sense of it. This is the beginning of side A on the EP.
What's that? Huh?
Awkward. It's kind of an awkward end there, but that's pretty much how it feels at the present time. Thanks, I like it. Ooh. So yeah, basically you put on a set of headphones, you hop in, you walk around, you poke and you prod things, and if you get into a fight, you need to rotate the device, unsheath your sword, and murderize some dudes. We're designing it so that it doesn't require a huge amount of commitment from the player to kind of get going and have a good time, make a decent amount of progress without trying too hard. So you can kind of just enjoy it on an audio-visual level, but I'm working with Cappy here, and they're primo game designers, so we had to kind of put some stuff in there down deep so that you got something to kind of chew on. So the further you go, the weirder things get. The more you dig in, the more you'll find. Anyway, we think it's going to be pretty cool when it lands on the App Store, again, in the not too distant future. So the subtitle for this talk is The Intoxication of Mythology. And I figured I'd provide a little context for where the project is coming from, in case you guys are curious. I think it's kind of an odd story. And I'll tell you also how it's going so far and the kind of different things we're doing behind the scenes. And I'll be throwing in some clips along the way, so it won't just be chatting. And lots of pictures. I hope you guys like pixels, because that's pretty much all I got. And if you'd like to chat, or if you want to take the current build for a spin, just catch up with me at the Fantastic Arcade. I'll be there after this with a couple iPads. And if you have any questions or want to hang out or whatever, just stop by. Okay, so just to get rolling here, it's kind of how that looks. It's kind of the name of this. And here's a bit of prehistory. I'm not going to go too far back, but so I'm from the west coast of Canada. I grew up in a forest by a mountain in a cloud next to an ocean. In the late 60s, my folks came from the UK, and my mom worked as a computer programmer in the late 60s, which kind of blows my mind. And my dad was a mainframe computer salesman for the 70s and the 80s, sort of like a Willy Loman, kind of like wandering around selling giant computers. I don't remember, but it's just crazy to think about. Anyway, the point of that is just, I was born in 1979, youngest of three, and we were a house of geeks. Like my parents had, a VIC-20, like the early home computer. But things really got going when the Commodore 64 showed up. That thing is the most badass computer system ever made. And we got box loads of pirated diskettes from our neighbor, like I think a lot of people did. And me, my brother, my sister, we were just engaged in this kind of perpetual archaeological investigation. Just sifting through the contents of each diskette to see if we could, maybe like find a game somewhere in there, maybe even a good game. It's a kind of formative experience in terms of me intersecting with games, and it left a big impression. If you found a game and you actually got it working, you didn't have a manual, you didn't really know what it was, you just kind of poke and prod it until you get to the next screen or until you figure out how to beat the bad guy or whatever it is. And that kind of exploratory kind of conversation that you have with the games, that's something I think is kind of the most interesting thing for me. It's, I don't necessarily need to know the rules and then master them so much as jump in, poke around, and see if I can figure out what the creators are trying to do. That to me is really interesting. And if there's a challenge element, that's good. You do want a challenge element. But often I just want the challenge in order to just kind of get me deeper into it. I don't necessarily want to prove myself. So that's kind of formative stuff for me. Another great thing about, back in the day, these crazy Commodore games, it was a time when there was like no established genres, like nowadays everything's kind of established, but back then like everything was its own genre. Everything was a mix of different ideas, and it was also kind of pioneering and so new. There was nothing that people could fall back on. Another weird thing about those games is before the Nintendo, and I think the creators had like all ages in mind. Like they had mom and dad and everybody in the family kind of, that it wasn't just aimed at kids. And there's something sort of respectful and cool about that. And anyway, I think it's pretty neat. I don't think it's just rose-tinted glasses though. Actually, going back to play like this game, Law of the West, it's still badass. I still love it. You got to go through a western town, have little conversations with people, and there's sometimes you'll anger them and you'll have to shoot them or whatever else. There's no good answer. There's like 13 conversations that I've never got it right. Anyway, I think it's totally fascinating. Obviously, Nintendo happened shortly after all that stuff, and the craft of video games went through the roof. I would say they set the tone for everything that came after. It all became about the craft. Like these guys are amazing industrial designers and toy designers. But what happened was it kind of skewed to kids. And I think they got kind of less interesting, like structurally really interesting, but like there wasn't that same communication going on. I still totally dig these though, for sure. Anyway, I'm just saying all that stuff just because Sorcery does have this kind of old Famicom vibe to it, even though it's way more relaxed and all this stuff. Castlevania 2, if you guys ever get around to playing Sorcery, it's got a lot of Castlevania 2 to it. You wander around and people lie to you, and you just get, you just feel the music, feel the graphics, and get into it there. All right, so moving ahead, I went east. I went to Toronto, which looks like that. At least it looks like that when it's on fire. And I went to art school and I learned to draw scissors and people and other people and stuff and turtles. And I learned to paint or something. And then, but anyway, one thing that happened at art school that's kind of weird, I fell into this Game Boy game making thing. This is like 2003 where like indie games didn't exist yet. And I was reintroduced to pixel art. And I'm a total amateur at this stuff, but it was fun to sort of apply some of this painting that I was learning to the pixels. And I started out with kind of trying to animate like a Jordan Mechner or Prince of Persia type of thing. Turns out that's really hard. Like animators can do it, but if you're not an animator, it's going to take weeks and it's going to look like garbage. I actually filmed my housemate for this project I was working on and tried to do the whole Jordan Mechner thing, and you know, it looked all right, but it was going to kill me. The game was just, it wasn't going to work. So my strategy was to boil the little dudes down until they were like itty bitty. And then it turns out they're way easier to animate. And anyway, I really dug this, and I started going crazy at this moment, because I just started having all these little ideas. This was one, I wanted to make this adventure game where you would start out in Kyoto, and you would go to Edo, Japan, and you would go through all the 53 stations of the Tokaido, which is the coastal road, and there'd be all this intrigue on the way, and there'd be haiku battles that you would get into. It was going to be badass. Anyway, I was having all kinds of ludicrous ideas. I wanted to make a Garden of Eden game. I still want to make a political thriller set on the Isle of Samos, 800 years BC, in the cult of Pythagoras, where the knowledge of irrational numbers is being suppressed. Yeah, so you know, a lot of weird stuff. We'll see if I get there. But the main thing was, you know, you can't make those if you're bogged down content-wise. And so, by boiling things down like this, it at least seemed possible. You know, if I stuck with it for years and years, that maybe I would, you know, I'd be able to get something like that off the ground. Meanwhile, I kept developing the style. This is, you know, I scaled them back up a little bit. This is Bones McCoy, Kirk, and my man Spock. And anyway, I was just really glad I could get like something out of this size of character, and so I kind of thought, hey, maybe I can make him a little bigger. So this was like one of the first images that looks like the, you know, the style that's kind of that I've been putting out there, and it was just, yeah, scaling it up, adding some texture, knocking out the background. Anyway, it started to feel cool, and so this was the time when I was like, all right, I need a brand. I'm gonna call it Superbrothers, because I don't know, it seemed like a cool name. In my mind, it's like Super Mario Brothers without Mario, which would be really interesting, I think. And it's also, I don't know, just totally misleading, and so that's funny too. Anyway, I did create it with a purpose, and kind of a crazy purpose now that I think about it. But I was thinking, okay, I got to create a style that's, you know, it's going to be distinct, and people are going to recognize it. But it's also going to let me kind of develop a language that I can then sort of say things with, you know, over time. You know, it was like a very intentional thing. And I figured that if I could get that language to a certain level, then maybe I could magically get some kind of soul in there. I really felt like, you know, a lot of games in 2003, that was like GameCube, PlayStation kind of era. Not a lot of soul going on. It's changed, but anyway, that was my whole thought. And I figured that it'd be good to have substance too, but I wasn't going to worry about it at that point. So I made up the name for a style. It was called Rustic 21st Century Minimalism, because I think coming up with stupid, awkward names like that is funny. And you know, I was making my way in like the illustration world, and you know, you do want to have a completely like unnecessarily verbose description for what you're doing. So I came up with this. You guys might have read it or whatever. I'm just going to share it because I think it's badass. Using individual blocks of color to form a precise visual statement is a technique that dates back through the ages, at least as far as 4th century BC Macedonia, arguably reaching its apex with the Christian mosaics of the Byzantine Empire 8 centuries later. It is largely due to the impact of the pixel, that most basic unit of an electronic display, that these grid-based pictures are enjoying a degree of ubiquity in the here and now. I think I wanted to be a Victorian encyclopedia writer at this point. For many among us, this peculiarly abstracted visual language harkens back only as far as the antiquated computer technology and electronic amusements of yesteryear. Necessarily tessellated to accommodate the limited capacities of the machines of that age, the scenarios that were presented in these diversionary programs were nonetheless enchanting, their stories and structures often derived from a rich, international tapestry of folk tale, myth, imagination, and human experience. It's like, I think I could apply for a grant with that, maybe. Anyway, I thought that was hilarious. So yeah, I was trucking on this, and you know, it was actually getting not exactly a lot of traction, but I was getting in a couple magazines here and there and a couple awards, and it was just such a treat to be making this stuff, you know, as somebody from the generation that grew up on this, infiltrating like legitimate publications with pixel art. Kind of, yeah, I was excited about it. I felt like we were scoring one for the team. I really like this one. I still want to make this Garden of Eden game. This is Adam and Eve just thinking about it. Just like, is it a power up or like, I don't know. I just really want to find out. Anyway, so I still wanted to actually make games, and I got Game Maker back in the day, and I took like a little time to try to learn it. But man, I'm not a programmer, and I just would always get, you know, bogged down and stuck and things like this. And I had this whole game with these little salarymen that were running around, and they were getting in fights, like big samurai warrior type fights, and I don't know. I thought it was pretty rad, but I couldn't get anywhere, and it was actually really frustrating. And this was like in '03 or whatever, so '04. So there's nobody around. Indie games didn't exist. I felt like a Looney Tune at the time. You know, it's like, what am I doing? Anyway, but there was a good news story that came out of it. Basically, so Jim Guthrie, he's the guy who's doing the music for Sorcery. I've been a huge fan of his for ages, and I heard that he was kind of a geek. I read an interview that Mr. Jim Monroe, who's in the audience, wrote in a weekly paper. Basically, Jim Guthrie composed a lot of the backing tracks on the PlayStation. Like, he used MTV Music Maker and like the gamepad in the back of the tour bus, and created all this wicked stuff. I heard about that, and I sent him some pixels, and he sent me this disc of unbelievable music, all composed on the PlayStation. And he just said, "Hey, if you can do something with it, you know, good luck to you." And it just blew my mind. That was awesome. This is what Jim looks like. Kind of, and here's a little bit of the PlayStation music. I'll just let it go for like a minute or so. This was released on an Asthmatic Kitty record, but I don't think it's seen released. That's what happens. But there's this one song on the record that he gave me that was just this really obnoxious composition where he took one guitar note and cloned it 1,000,000 times, called Children of the Clone. And it just like jumped out. It's like, I think I can make a music video of this. Never made a music video, but how hard can it be? So just, you know, one pixel at a time, I put this thing together and sent it over to Jim. It was really hard to make, but not that hard. Goes on like that until a murder happens. Anyway, you can see it online. It's up there. And then a little while later, I did this kind of goofy one again for Jim, and it's just you know, like obviously I got a thing for '70s computer technology or something. This is a really weird one. It's got an awkward start, but it ends up with just a dance-off between these two geeks, and then you see a picture of the entire internet. But it's got a really slow start, so I'm just gonna scoot ahead, and then you can see very stretching. He's stretching for the dance off. It's just gotta get warmed up, but it's gonna be amazing when he gets going. All right, here we go. But that's it. That's all he's got. Dude, not getting up. here's some goddamn dancing. Yeah. Alright, here we go. We're gonna see the internet in a minute. The whole internet. It took a long time to paint. There it is. And you can see part of the way through, I gave up animating all the little lights because I had a deadline, and it was just killing me. So yeah, okay, no more animating lights. You're done. Anyway, stuff like that. Thank you. Meanwhile, I was doing, still infiltrating a couple magazines. It's pretty sporadic. Like I'm not, I'm not doing this too steadily. But sometimes they turn out really well. This is one for like Runner's World. I thought it was cool. And this is one for a science magazine. Man, real quick, those scientists are taking oceanographic data, converting it to Google's Google Earth format, and then sending it out to the pirates and beach bums online to check the ocean data. I love trying to tackle something as weird as that. I don't know, super happy with it. But it turns out you can't actually make a ton of money when you're doing a bunch of pixels back in 03, 04. So I decided that I was going to join the industry and make games with people who look somber and have guns. And so I went to school and worked real hard and stuff like this. Man, yeah. Guns on cars, right? Huh? Anyway. And then I got a job in the industry, and we made a game that, of course, took the world by storm. You've probably heard of it. And this was cool. Like the place was kind of a gong show, but I had a chance to do anything. Like I could do sound design, I could do like level design. It was like a little bit of like I directed the trailers for what it's worth, which isn't that fancy a deal. But the big thing was, just realizing how hard it is to get anything done when you're dealing with this much graphics, and even this isn't as much as most games. When you get to this kind of scale, it's just hard to get in and out. Anybody in the industry probably has had some experience like that. But anyway, moved on to some sort of like sword and sorcery type stuff, and that was really fun, exploring mythology. Anyway.